Dexter is one of the most famous true crime dramas ever to grace American television screens. The show has created quite a cult following despite the grisly nature of the program. But while some fans might be considered hardcore, there was one fan that seems to be the show's ultimate fan. Named Mark Twitchell, this budding film director from Edmonton, Canada, became enthralled with the show in the fall of 2007. Probably because of the love he had for the show, Twitchell moved on from the Star Wars fan flick that made him famous and started producing horror and slasher films. However, something appeared to be missing from Twitchell's cinematography despite all his best efforts. They say that some of the best films are based on a true story. After all, when basing a film off of fact, the writing pretty much does itself, so the director can focus on telling the story. For Twitchell, he wanted to create the perfect story, but in his mind, he had to become that story first. That is what drove him to become just like the actor he loved so much on the TV screen. In the fall of 2008, he decided to act upon this murder fantasy and create a film based on his experience. In acting out his murder fantasy, Twitchell turned to posing as a beautiful woman on the online dating app Plenty of Fish. A young Edmonton native named John Altinger was intrigued by the young woman who beckoned him to come to her home for a first date. However, John would never realize that going to that dreary back alley on the north side of Edmonton would be the last night of his life. But before you call John naive, he definitely had a sixth sense about what might happen. Sensing something was wrong when the woman sent a convoluted paragraph of directions instead of a physical address, he forwarded the email to his best friend. After his friend had not heard from him since his date on October 3rd, 2008, his friends became concerned for his safety. Breaking into his apartment, his friends found it untouched from when he had left it for his date. Alarmed, they contacted police, who initially were reluctant to believe he was missing until being shown a series of strange emails that were not like John at all. Investigating officers followed the directions and found that the location was not a house but rather a garage in an alley that was attached to a house. The owner of both the garage and house was no other than Mark Twitchell. After initially denying anything to do with John, Twitchell later approached detectives with information he believed could help the investigation. After meeting an officer in his squad car, Twitchell agreed to go to the police station to tape the first of several formal interviews he would give regarding the disappearance and murder of John Altinger. Once Twitchell arrives at the police station, he is interviewed by a detective from the Edmonton Homicide Squad. Unknown to Twitchell, over the past 2 weeks, they have been gathering a plethora of evidence that proves something bad happened to John, and Twitchell is the one who probably did it.
He is an assistant to you, but he didn't rent the garage, it's yours, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And you pay for it?
Yeah.
For the rental? Okay. And what do you call your company?
Express Entertainment.
Express Entertainment, okay. And I understand you're filming and stuff like that there.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was the purpose of getting the facility.
Yeah.
Twitchell is explaining here how he created a new media company called Express Entertainment after gaining some internet fame for creating a Star Wars fan fiction film. His cinema career looked like it was actually taking off. Securing funding from several investors in Los Angeles, he now had enough capital to start producing films full-time with several partners. Twitchell also points out that he had only recently moved to his new address within the past few months. The main reason why he sought out this property was the fact that it had a detached garage that was secluded. The stated reason was for shooting film scenes in a place that they did not mind getting a little dirty. But as police would later learn, it was actually the perfect location to entrap, murder, and dismember unsuspecting victims. Edmonton detectives then continue questioning Twitchell about the unusual setup he has created for the garage.
The windows are all blocked and the doors are metal and nobody can see in there. Right. And it's nobody's business what goes on in there, that's your...
We block out the light so that during the day when we're filming and we're trying to create a nighttime atmosphere, that the sunlight doesn't get
to do with the production.
Yeah. We try to control light as much as possible.
While Twitchell's explanation might make sense for shooting scenes for some films, the fact that he keeps the windows covered at all times is a strange behavior for the officers. It makes them question about what Twitchell has to hide inside his garage. However, the detective still wants to give Twitchell the benefit of the doubt and see what he has to say about his film that he had been shooting.
So what type of film is it, that you're shooting at this particular time? You're talking about shooting at this, what sort of a film is it?
It's a suspense thriller, actually. It's a short film. The total runtime is only going to be about 8 or 9 minutes.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Suspense thriller?
Right.
Okay, and what would you do in a film like this once you've filmed 8 or 9 minutes?
Go through the editing process. I try to organize it so that it didn't have a lot of effects work to do, so it wouldn't take forever in post-production. But we edit the film together and then submit it to film festivals, try to get it picked up by a distributor. Hopefully somebody will grab it and use it in some way. Or it's also used as pitch material in order to develop a television series or a feature film out of it, to convince someone that we know what we're doing as filmmakers and that we deserve to get money basically to make more material.
Detectives do not know it at this time, but later evidence recovered from his computer would show how twisted this suspense thriller really was. In Mark's own words, the film was supposed to be about a budding serial killer whose goal in life is to kill unfaithful men. Posing as a pretty young woman on online dating apps, the killer would lure unsuspecting men to his home. But instead of encountering a hot young lady for a steamy rendezvous, the men encounter the killer. Attacking from the shadows, the killer uses a stun gun to subdue his victim. After torturing the man using any means possible, the killer murders his victim and then begins the gruesome task of dismembering the body. In order to keep up the belief that his victims are alive, during the torture session, the killer forces the men to reveal all their social media and email account information. Upon their death, the killer pretends to be the victim to lead on his friends and family that the man is still alive. But that information would come out later. However, for now, the police had already performed a cursory search of the garage with Twitchell's consent. During that search, they noticed some very disturbing items, including what looked like a bloody pipe, a bunch of trash bags, and rolls of duct tape. Twitchell was obviously alarmed that the police had been in his garage and begins creating a story about how anything found in the garage couldn't be his.
Yes, it's not. It was a little odd, but went down the side of the garage, came back around, looked at the door itself, and the first thing that I noticed upon looking a little closer at it, because the light wasn't that great, but I could see what was going on, the padlock didn't look familiar to me. And I was the one that actually put the latch on the door, and I had a padlock previously, but it wasn't the same one. The one that I had was like a silver on the outside, like a black plastic dial in the center, and this one was just all metal.
Yeah.
So
you noticed a different padlock.
Yeah.
And that on the door.
Right.
Now, what other locks are there on that door? Can you describe?
There's also a deadbolt.
A deadbolt?
Yeah. Pretty standard lock.
Yeah. And is there another type of lock or handle or?
No, just the doorknob, but I don't think the doorknob locks. I've never tried it, but I don't think it does.
Okay. So regular doorknob, deadbolt, and then a padlock. Okay, and the padlock was the padlock through a latch of some sort. Yeah, that would hold the door, close the lock. And that was the same, but the lock itself was different.
Correct.
Before this interview, Twitchell had claimed to another Edmonton officer that someone had broken into his vehicle the week before and stolen his glasses, several receipts, some mail, and pocket change out of his car. Twitchell claims that the thief must have used the information on the receipts and mail to go to his garage and break into it. Upon exiting, the thieves placed a different lock on the door that Mark still somehow had the key for. The detectives are obviously not buying this story, since it is the equivalent to the "not my pants" defense when criminals get arrested. However, officers are inclined to let Mark spew his made-up story to let him dig himself deeper into a hole. But after explaining away the mysterious lock change-out, Twitchell has more excuses for the potential blood evidence that police would later find.
Paper towels, like stain cleaner, gloves, the usual stuff. Just because we deal with this, when you do anything that's involving like suspense thrillers or anything like that, and you want to have something that looks like blood on the screen, we use this mix that's like a corn syrup with food coloring in it, because it looks really good on camera, it has the right consistency and everything, but it's sticky as hell. It gets everywhere, and it's a nightmare. And last time, it got all over the chair, got all over the floor, it's like ridiculous. So, and that was really my thing, was just because then everybody's grabbing stuff and moving it over, and every time they do, they rub up against it and get it all over their clothes, and it's sticky and annoying. So, just a matter of keeping that stuff off of there and clean, and not having to deal with that, because we spend, the problem with an untested effect. This thing where we were, the achieved shot was running a sword through a guy who was sitting in a chair.
Yeah.
And so the way we did it is we just had like the actor sitting in the chair and then the other actor pretending to hold the sword.
Twitchell's film buddies would later confirm that the thriller did involve a sword, but that there was not too much cleanup after the shoot. What is shocking to consider is that Mark, possibly through a combination of delirium through lack of sleep and his own arrogance, is casually explaining some of the chilling details of the murder and dismemberment of John. Obviously, police did not believe anything Mark was saying, because the very next day he was called in for a follow-up interview. This time, the detectives would try a different tactic and be much more forceful than the day before to see if they could get Mark to crack. One of the first points that the detective wants to unravel is the events surrounding how Mark came into possession of John's red Mazda hatchback. After scanning the neighborhood for it, one of Mark's friends came forward and said he had moved it into his house at Mark's request, since it was a manual and Mark could not drive a manual. Mark then went into a convoluted story about how he obtained the car from a stranger at a gas station.
You are definitely not a dumb man. You know very well that you don't buy a car that's worth over $10,000 from someone for $40. You know that. You know that you get a bill of sale. You deal with items on eBay. You sell items all the time. Just like going to a store and buying it. That part of your story is just lie after lie after lie. And it's time to end those lies, Mark. I mean, your version about the gas, your first version to Mike Tabler, you're leaving the garage, going to get gas. Then he approaches you. Now in your version today, no, you got gas before. Your reason for having gas doesn't even make sense. You're buying gas for a lawnmower you don't own? You're buying gas just to keep in your car? No, you're buying gas to get rid of things. You shake your head, but you know what I'm saying is true. Specifically, do you remember talking to the constable last night? Specifically, you talked to the constable last night. He specifically asked you 3 or 4 times, do you remember seeing a red car any time around your garage, anything? No, officer, I don't remember anything but a red car. Yet now, and you never mention that to Detective Tabler. Not once do you mention a red car or buying a car off an individual you didn't know for $40 while he's asking about the disappearance of a guy who's seen it at your garage. And it's obvious why you didn't mention it, because you had something to do with his disappearance. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
The detective here is being quite confrontational, and Mark is simply clamming up under the pressure. Because Mark cannot come up with a reasonable lie, he stops talking and lets the detective lay into him. This is because the first story he told about how he came into possession of John's car was ridiculous. According to Twitchell, he went to get gas by his home when a stranger approached him. The man told Twitchell he had to get rid of his car now and that he would sell it to him for whatever he had in his wallet. Why the man would allegedly sell the car for just $40 was because his rich new girlfriend was paying for him to leave for Costa Rica and that she would buy him a new car upon his return. What is strange about this claim is that this is eerily similar to the emails John's friends and co-workers received, explaining his absence several days after he went missing. Even more incriminating is the fact that the receipts proved John bought a ton of gasoline, much more than what he should have needed in his vehicle. Evidence would later prove that after dismembering John in the garage, he took his remains in a burn barrel on his parents' property where he partially destroyed them before disposing of them. The detective further grills him on the burn barrel next. Mark had previously denied that the barrel in the garage was a burn barrel.
I mean, you have a barrel in your garage. A barrel you say you buy for garbage. Everyone knows in the movie industry those are known as burn barrels. We got that off your own friends. They're the ones telling us this. Your co-workers.
What the detective is alluding to here is the mountain of evidence that police recovered from his garage after obtaining a search warrant and conducting a proper search. Among the mountain of evidence recovered from the garage were 2 bloody knives, a bloody pipe, garbage bags, duct tape, cleaning supplies, and the burn barrel. But that was not the most disturbing evidence. Covering the walls, floor, and doors were literally hundreds of blood droplets. Forensic experts flown in to process the scene later testified to the life and death struggle that went on in that garage, only with the horrible aftermath of the crime. Forensic analysis would later show that the pipe and knives had John's DNA from his blood and muscle tissue on the instruments. It would also be found inside the burn barrel where officers suspected he destroyed the remains. Later that same day, a search warrant executed on his vehicle would recover the laptop that carried the killer's confession. Though not named, the script serves as a virtual confession to the crime, with the details matching up to the forensic evidence recovered from the scene. Mark would remain tight-lipped about the crime for several years until he came forward wanting to make a deal. In exchange for getting a chance at parole, he would reveal the location of John's remains. Hidden inside a sewer several blocks from his parents' property, the majority of John was recovered so that his family could finally lay him to rest. For his gruesome crimes, Mark would eventually be sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.